Hi, folks. My name is Natasha Tracy. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Healthy Place Instagram Live. Today we're talking about binge eating disorder. Did you actually know that binge eating disorder is the most common kind of eating disorder? Our first guest is going to join us in a minute, and she's going to explain her experience with binge eating. Then our second guest is going to be here, and she's a therapist who works with people who have binge eating disorder. If you have a question for our guests, don't hesitate to ask us. Just type it in the chat box and we'll get to it as the show progresses. We're also looking for your comments on binge eating. Maybe you'd like to share a little bit of your experience. You can help other people that way. Put those in the text box too. We'll also be sharing helpful links about binge eating information and our binge eating blog on HealthyPlace. So, if you're interested in the signs of binge eating, the types of binge eating, the causes and treatments, hold on and we'll be giving you that information. Our first guest is Grace, and I'm just going to look for her now. And there she is. Grace is just about to be with us, and Grace is going to talk about her own experience with binge eating. Hi, Grace.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
Doing good. Happy to be here.
Grace was actually the binge eating disorder blogger at HealthyPlace for quite some time.
Yeah, quite a while.
For quite a while. Yes, that's right. So we're really glad you could be with us here today. So at what age did you actually start binge eating, and what was that like?
It's almost hard for me to remember, to be quite honest, but I kind of pinpoint it around 14 years old, and I really didn't know binge eating was what I was doing. It just, it kind of happened, and I knew I was out of control, and it made me unhappy. But at that time, I didn't know binge eating was a thing. So
You were 14 years old at the time. What was it like actually being a teenager and dealing with binge eating?
it made it that much more of a secret because I felt like what I was doing was so not normal. And then that's an age when you're, super self-conscious about fitting in with your peers, and not it's not cool to like have these weird behaviors or things that you don't see other people doing. You feel very alone, and it's already hard enough at that age, I think, going through the adolescence. So I think that just kind of deepened those feelings for me.
Absolutely, I can see that. Many people keep their eating disorder behaviors a secret, just like you were talking about. So how did you actually do that at that age, and how did that make you feel?
Right. So again, even though I didn't know what I was doing was any type of eating disorder behavior, I knew it was not right. But my parents had divorced when I was 14, around a freshman in high school. And so with my dad out of the house, my mom was working a ton just to, keep us afloat because, she needed to. So there really wasn't anyone at home. My brother, he's a couple years older than me. We weren't very connected, so he'd kind of be in his room. I'd be doing my thing, and there was really no one around to like monitor or see what was happening. So keeping it a secret wasn't really hard. It just kind of happened that way.
So at 14 you started, and then you say at 19 your secret was finally out. What happened there?
Okay, yeah. So when I was 19, so I was sophomore in college. I got so disgusted with my behaviors and felt so much shame and embarrassment. And so when I was 19, it was like one day I woke up and a switch just flipped, and I wanted to get as far away from those behaviors as possible, which ended up with me developing anorexia. So in my mind, I was stopping the binge eating, but I went so far to the other end and getting away. I didn't realize I was just developing, more harmful behaviors for myself. And with that happening, and the weight difference, which wasn't an issue for me with binge eating, that's when I just, it's my body. I can't hide it. It can't be a secret. So yeah.
So I just want to say, if you're just joining us, welcome. We are talking to Grace about her struggles with binge eating and her recovery from binge eating disorder. If you have a question for Grace, if you'd like to share a comment with our community, please type it in the chat box. So you don't actually hear a lot about people with binge eating going into treatment programs, but I understand you developed anorexia sort of almost in a response to your binge eating, and then was that how you ended up in a residential treatment facility?
Yeah, so with my mind was already all over the place years ago when the eating stuff started, but with the low body weight, more depression came in, and I was just completely miserable. And I reached out for help at that point because I couldn't keep doing that. So I took a year off of school and I went, yes, into residential treatment for a few months.
And what was it like being in residential treatment?
Oh, there was so much good with so much bad, because you have to do all these things you've been avoiding doing. But I will say I had a pretty great experience. I found a lot of really good friends there just from us all going through the same thing. Obviously, there's going to be tiffs and there's going to be staff you butt heads with, but overall, it was the best thing I could have done, and I'm really grateful I had like a mom that was researching stuff and a therapist that was really great at setting me up somewhere that she thought would be helpful for me.
That sounds amazing. So you are 30 years old now. So you started when you were 16, and then at age 26, you stopped your binge eating behaviors. So that's 12 years later. So you said that a switch flipped one day and you went over to anorexia, and then eventually you ended up in a residential treatment facility. Can you tell us what exactly facilitated a final recovery for you?
Right. So it didn't come right away. It wasn't proof I was in treatment for 3 months and, I'm cured. It was definitely through that next decade, a lot of ups and downs and slips. And there were a couple more like partial hospitalization outpatient programs that I did go into. And then the last time it got, I guess, bad, I didn't go anywhere for treatment. I kind of just worked on it on my own. And I think that's when I really realized that it wasn't something that was just going to go away, and that it was something I really had to put work into and not just, show up at a group or show up at therapy. And so once I realized that and really worked towards it and kept, practicing recovery, that's kind of when it stuck. And I'm not perfect with my recovery because that's impossible. I do have moments, I do have thoughts, I do have little slips, but this is definitely the strongest, most sustained time I've ever had away from these behaviors.
And if there are people watching today who are struggling with binge eating, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, first thing is don't hide it. Talk to someone trusted. There's so many like organizations and hotlines and things you can reach out to if you aren't comfortable talking to someone who's necessarily in your life that know that is bad as it feels. It can get better. It can get better. You're not going to be stuck like this forever. And also you're not alone. And that's the biggest thing, because I just felt so alone and like no one else did this. I was some kind of weird, like alien person. I was the only one, but you're not. It's so common. And yeah, just remembering that you're not by yourself. There are people who want to help you. There are people who can support you. There are people you can talk to, and just don't be ashamed to speak up.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's a really great note to leave it on. Thank you for talking with us and the Healthy Place audience today. We are actually going to have on now our second guest, and she's going to talk to us about what it's like being a binge eating disorder therapist. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So her name is actually Sarah Dosanjh, and she's going to talk to us in just a second. She's also known as the binge eating therapist. We are going to put her Instagram information as well as Grace's Instagram information on so that you can follow them once we're done if you like. So we're just waiting for her to pop online now. Ms. Dosanjh is a former binge eater herself, and she's turned psychotherapist who now specializes in helping other people break free from the cycle of binge eating. That sounds like something that is so powerful and important, and I'm hoping she can be with us today to talk a little bit more about that. And again, if you need information about binge eating disorder or eating disorders in general, HealthyPlace can give those to you. Ms. Dosanjh.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thanks for asking me to be here.
We are very glad to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
No worries at all.
So you heard Grace's story. Is that typical of those who binge eat?
I tell you what struck me about Grace's story that I thought was actually quite atypical is to go from binge eating disorder to anorexia. I found that to be pretty unusual. I see a lot of people going the other way. So people who have anorexia first, and then when they're in recovery from anorexia, those urges to binge because the appetite is so dysregulated at that point and food is still so challenging. So I think that's a really common one, to go from restriction into binge eating. And most people I work with, when the binge eating started, if it didn't go back to childhood, some people do, like when they're very young, it's normally preceded by a diet or some kind of restriction.
So Grace struggled with her eating disorder for 14 years before her recovery, and she was in and out of treatment, like she was saying. What makes binge eating disorder so difficult to recover from?
I think it's quite hard to draw a line where is the eating problematic? Because you will probably hear a lot of people saying, oh, I binged, or I ate too much, or I was out of control with food. So a lot of people know what it's like to eat a lot of food and then regret it. But binge eating is a different beast. I mean, you feel completely out of control. It feels like you're acting against your own will. And it's so complex because there's physiological things going on, emotional things going on, social things going on. We live in a diet culture that's telling us we should be shrinking our bodies and all of that. So I think it's challenging to recover because there's so many different areas. But also because of the strong physiological component. People think that they should just be able to decide with their thinking minds how much they need to be eating. And quite often, what we're being told, it just isn't enough food. So if you're always trying to eat at a deficit. So one of the reasons I think why it's so hard is because it's really difficult sometimes to draw that line. Where does the physiological end and the psychological emotional begin? And how do you know? Like if you haven't binged for a month, and then you have a binge, does that mean you're straight back in binge eating disorder? I would say for me, there was a couple of years where I would describe myself as being in a semi-recovered state, where I was okay for some of the time, but I would have lapses. So this word recovery, I think for some people isn't helpful because it feels like this place that you get to. And for other people in times of stress, this may come back up for them again. And then they're going to be telling themselves, oh, I'm not recovered because I've gone back to these old behaviors. So I think we have to be careful how we talk about recovery and try and talk about it in a way that's useful for people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I just want to share with you a comment that we just got. And that comment is great. And it just says, thank you so much for this conversation. So I'm going to say thank you to you and thank you to Grace as well for having this conversation with us today. So there is a lot of shame around binge eating, and you were just talking about that. So does that make it all the more difficult to actually seek out treatment?
100%, because it's not a rational problem. And quite often people, when they try and talk about that they're struggling with binge eating to people who just haven't experienced it or don't get it, they don't get good responses. They'll get diet advice. They'll get all this kind of practical advice as if it's a lack of knowledge. And that's, one of my bugbears, because most people who struggle with something like binge eating disorder have more nutritional knowledge than I would say the average GP doctor does.
Okay. Thank you. So you talked about relapse, and you talked about the fact that that's common, and you talked about recovery being a word we have to be careful with, right? Mm-hmm. So would you say that relapse is something that someone's always going to deal with, or will there be a place where you might be recovered to a place where you won't relapse again?
Well, I wouldn't use the word relapse, actually, because that makes it sound like you've gone back to how it was before. But we're talking about lapses. So let's say even if you get yourself in a pretty good place with food, but you go somewhere, I don't know, let's say you're at a buffet or a birthday party, and you eat a lot of food, that feeling of feeling too full can be so intertwined with feelings of guilt. And so you're going to have an emotionally challenging time. So I wouldn't say that full recovery isn't possible at all. I think that's the place to kind of start. But I think it takes a long time to undo it if it's been around for a long time. And it depends how much of an emotional struggle it's been. Because I have worked with some people that when they stop trying to diet, the binging almost completely clears up. So for those people, it was very physiological. But for other people where it might be more emotional, where it might be sort of some early family dynamics, maybe that they always find themselves in a slightly triggered state if the circumstances all come together to kind of set that off for them, if that makes sense. Everyone's so unique. So I do absolutely think it's possible to recover. And I think that some people will have to manage it, but not everybody. I would never say it's the same for anyone.
So one last question, and I want this question so that people can understand who's watching this. What is the treatment for binge eating disorder right now, and how effective is it for people?
Okay, so I have to kind of own it that this is a personal opinion, because I'm a private practitioner. So I'm not working within a clinic setting, and I'm not working within the system, if that makes sense. So here I'm in the UK. If you go to our National Health Service, you will be offered CBT. Now, CBT is great for some things, but it's such a rational approach to therapy. And I don't think that this is very rational. And again, a lot of people who I've worked with, and I'm going to be biased because I'm only going to see the people who it hasn't worked for. So I need to say that as well. There might be people who it does work for. But a lot of people who I've spoken to, like, it felt like accountability at the time. So while I was having the CBT, things were really good. And then when I stopped having it, like, the old behaviors came back, and I couldn't get myself back out of it. So for me, I take a much more holistic approach. I think we need to look at restriction. We need to look at, because it's compulsive behavior, it means going unconscious and disconnected. So we need to look at how to stay present. And one of the reasons why it's so hard to stay present is because there's so much guilt and shame around. So then there's emotional work that needs to be done. And then the very last part is kind of like figuring out a way to eat. Some people have never known, they don't know what a normal relationship with food looks like. If I ask them to tell me, this is the word, they divide their days into good and bad days. So if I say, tell me about a good day, almost invariably it's not enough food. So I'm a big fan of the intuitive eating movement. I think that can be, when done well, is really good, because people can retrain and relearn how to be in touch with their appetites again. Because for many of us, we've lost touch of it, because there's so much more going on around food than, you know, what food's designed for, which is not just physical. It's also about social and connection, and there is an emotional aspect to food. Even hunger's a feeling, right? So when we've got a lot of emotions going on, we can't respond to our hunger very well. At times of stress, one of the first things that gets messed up is our appetite for most people.
True. And so one of our viewers named Rebecca asked us, what does a normal relationship with food look like?
I think that's part of the work, I think, to be done, is figuring that out. And I think for me, the healthiest relationship with food is one where you feel connected to your body. And it's really hard to feel connected to your body when you don't like it. So it's that ability to become internally regulated. We have these numbers thrown at us about how much we're supposed to eat every day. But actually, our energy needs vary from day to day and vary from person to person. So when we try and use our thinking minds to figure out how much and what we should eat, I think sometimes we make it worse. So I think it's about becoming present. If you want to start learning how to be with food, I think it starts with presence, with paying attention. because how many of us sit down and just eat, and when we're not on our phones or we're not watching TV or doing something else? So the body doesn't even have a chance to learn how different foods make you feel. But if you're always looking at, even if it's just looking at your food when you eat, and you see the food disappear as it goes into you, all of that kind of adds to satiation. So I would say that a healthy relationship with food is the ability to feel satisfied with food, to feel peaceful around food, and to have good energy levels. And that's going to vary from person to person.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. I do want to leave it there, Mr. Dosanjh. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
No worries. Thank you for having me. Thanks.
And of course, a big thanks to Grace as well for sharing her personal experience. And of course, for you as well for joining us here today. We are going to post this, we're going to post their Instagram tags so that you can follow both of them for more information on binge eating disorder. And we'll be back with another Instagram Live in 2 weeks. So make sure you follow at HealthyPlace for more information about what we're going to be talking about then. And of course, for more mental health information, quotes and videos. I hope you have a great day.